Hey, what is going on, ADPI Nation? This is your host, Kevin Brenner, and I have another spectacular guest joining me on the Active Duty Passive Income podcast. Today's podcast is going to be really kind of celebrating one of our biggest contributors in the Active Duty Passive Income community. I'm sure you've seen his posts in the Facebook community and elsewhere. He has really inspired a lot of people, and we had to get him on the podcast, and we did. We got him, everyone. We got Nelson. He's here. Nelson Zambrano,
Thank you,
welcome
thank
to
you,
the
thank
show,
you.
man.
I am very happy to be here. I'm honored to be here, actually.
Yeah. So, dude, like the stuff that you shared just about your journey and your transition, not just your incredible military career and the stuff you've done in the military after leaving the military, and then now you got this whole thing, short-term rentals and boutique hotels and all of this stuff. And we're gonna dive into all of this stuff, which is really, really cool. There's just I mean, I think we got to go back to the beginning. We got to start with your military background because, from what I understand, you did a lot of, you were infantry in the army, and then you did a lot of special forces and some support there, and you did a lot of kind of hostage and kidnapping and all of that stuff and all of that. So let's walk through that because I think it's just
Sure,
super
sure.
interesting.
I mean, my background is I'm a son of immigrants. My parents are immigrants from Colombia, South America. And like so many parents are, immigrant parents, they want their best for their kids. So the strange series of events, right? One thing that really helped is even though I was born in the US, my parents sent me back to Colombia to go to school, but not at a Colombian school, at a US expat school for US expat kids. So even though I was going to school in Colombia, it's as if I was going to school in the US. And this probably wouldn't fly today, but at that time, at that school that was in Colombia, only one flag flew, and that was the flag of the US. We only celebrated US holidays. You spoke English in the school. And it
Oh
was, I mean,
wow.
it was definitely like we didn't play soccer, none of that stuff. It was US. And then guess what? Some more US. I guess economic reasons, my parents brought me back to Brooklyn, and there was not that elite school anymore. This is, rough and tumble Brooklyn back in the day. So, but it was good to kind of get a taste of that, right? It was really good to get a taste of that. Kind of fast forward, I graduated from high school, or as I was graduating, and I knew I wanted to have some adventure and excitement in my life. And I grew up watching James Bond movies. Okay. I grew up watching James Bond movies, and that to me meant the military. My parents weren't so hot about this. They said, well, why don't you go to college? And then I said, well, best way to mix both is the reserves. So I joined the reserves and I went to college at the same time. And I had a military scholarship
Sure.
with that. The first Gulf War came and well, the Berlin Wall came down, which to me was everybody was a big surprise. Nobody expected the Russians would become good guys. So that happened and I was kind of lost for a bit. And the first Gulf War came, got recalled to active duty, did that deployment. And that was a very interesting experience because as a brand new second lieutenant, just finished the infantry school, I got into third special forces group. So, I was just some guy in shape basically. But that was one of the
They're like, you're a
opportunities. The
reservist. Come
group
on up.
commander, he had happened to have served in Colombia with the Colombian Lanceros. And he said, well, if you got Lancero blood in you, you're good enough. And if you die, you die. And if you don't, you don't. So that was a really good experience for me to be able to do that. I left active duty. And I mean, here you are, you're a brand new second lieutenant, just made first lieutenant, SF combat patch, CIB. And I'd been on some missions and things, and I'm back in the reserves again. But I liked having the dual career. So I moved to Florida. Why? I'd watched a lot of Miami Vice episodes, so I said, "That's where I gotta go." And
All your like
yeah,
major life
well,
decisions are
you know,
shaped
you're
by
you're an
television
impressionable
movies,
young man.
and
You
it seems
wanna
to
do
have panned
something in
out
your
so far.
life. I'm watching these 2 guys, racing around Miami, meeting all the girls, nice cars. That's for me.
Yeah.
And but I always stayed in the reserves because to me, that was a way that I could immediately, 1, be a part of something that was much bigger than myself. I could contribute. If my country was in need, I was always available. And the network of people I noticed, and it was a really interesting network of people.
Mhm.
I remember once I went to advanced camp, which is this summer course that ROTC cadets have to go to, and I had grown a mustache. I'd grown a mustache, so no one said anything. And then this one West Point captain, he pulled me to the side. He said, "Nelson, the mustache."
Mhm.
And I was like, "Sure." And he said, at the time you had annual reports, written annual reports. And he said, if you open up the back of an annual report, do you ever see any CEOs with a mustache? And I said, no, sir. And I said, then that was it. But what I liked about it was it was this network of people where he was basically saying, you have the potential to be a CEO. You have that. So you're like circling in that area. Don't screw it up. And I like that. I like the fact that mentorship. A lot of people in the civilian will just keep their mouths shut. Oh, I
Right.
don't want people. I want to be politically correct. They hurt his feelings. But then they cut off the door to this poor schmuck to be a CEO. He took it upon himself to tell me that. I was like, well, I felt flattered and honored. That thing, flew off. So that network, that mentoring to me meant a lot to me. I mean, some people might be offended, bothered by it. I looked at it like, wow,
Yeah.
this guy took the time. You could have kept his mouth shut, and, me screwing up without knowing it. So I always kept that military kind of side career that I gave a lot of emphasis to while I had my civilian career. And I worked in financial services. That network, and I emphasize the word network, carried me a long way.
Mhm.
So 9/11 happened for a freak reason. I was supposed to be in the World Trade Center. I was not there that day. It was pure luck that I wasn't there that day. My military buddies who were there, they all got out because,
Wow.
explosion, you don't stick around, right? You go, what's going on? You just you haul ass. And that led to a series of
Yes.
deployments and back and forth and a whole series of things
Yeah.
that happen in life. And during all that happening, I was investing also in real estate as well. So, and I can go more into that, the kidnapping ransom work, another, the things.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of so, and it kind of bleeds into the story here of what you were doing and with the network. And to clarify for our listeners out there, the network you're talking about is the network of military and ex-military and veterans that worked in your line of work as a civilian, and they were guiding you along the way, and you opened that door. Just so being in the military, whether you're active duty or whether you're on the outside, you're always going to be in the military, and keep that network, because that network can open up for you. I mean, that, whether it's a West Pointer network, whether it's a service based network, whatever, it doesn't matter. You are a service member, and you shouldn't hide that from people. And I think that's a really good point. And it helped you. Hopefully, you shaved the mustache, and maybe you made it to the C suite. I don't know, but working in financial services and taking your skills, which I think is an applicable topic that we get a lot here, is how do you transition? How do you leverage the skills you learned in the military, and how do you transition into a civilian career? So my question to you is, how did you take your SF skills that you have, you went from a guy who was in shape and who was given a chance to be in special forces, and obviously you proved yourself.
Yeah. So,
How did you
and that's a
take
really
the
good
that
question.
and
So
apply
I
it
guess
to
part of it
a
is
civilian career?
it's
Because
more
that
of the,
seems
there
pretty
are
difficult
more
unless you're
soft
doing like private
skills that
security or
transfer
something
over
like
than
that,
hard
right?
skills. Okay. Now there's some jobs in the military that it's definitely the hard skill that transfers over, but you must apply the soft skill. And the soft skill is one is leadership, knowing how to handle people, deal with people, being able to read through BS, right? Being able to be, I guess somebody can call it New York kind. And nothing against my friends from California versus California nice, right? So it's like New York kind versus California nice, which is. You want an example of that, Kevin? Okay, so
Ah, I see.
Californian. Let's say somebody has a flat tire, right? You get a flat tire. New York,
Sure, sure, hit me with it.
California nice is, man, that's too bad. And again, nothing against folks with California, right? We can make any state, but we all know kind of New York example. That's too bad. That tire, they ought to fix the roads. It's a who is you, and life sucks. That's California nice. New York kind is, look, get out of the way, bring me the flat tire. Hey, pay attention. We're gonna change this shit. I gotta go somewhere. Look, I better not catch you on his road again, but you changed the tire, and you're on your way. You got your ass chewed, but you're on your way, you know. So the military teaches the New York kind. That's being kind. That's the New
With
York.
your flat
The
tire.
military teaches that, and a lot of
Sure. It just the Yeah, well, but you're cutting through a lot of the, like you said, you're cutting through a lot of the BS. You're getting to the point, and that is an
right.
applicable soft skill that, maybe a more understated
Yeah.
than other ones that we learn in the military, and it's across any service because at the end of the day, we gotta get the mission done, right? And people in the
Yeah,
civilian
and
sector, they're like,
exactly.
if
And
it
then
doesn't get done, it
so
doesn't get
the
done. But
applicability
for
is that,
us,
first of all,
some in some
somebody's
cases,
always
in some
watching.
jobs, and I'm sure it is
Somebody
more
is always
applicable to
watching.
you in your line of work. If
And
it
that
didn't get done,
person
people are
who's
dying.
watching could be a person that
And
makes a positive change in your life. One person makes one decision, positively change your life. It could be an investor. It could be someone who
Mhm.
says, "Hey, look, I'm looking for someone." It could be that. So bring that persona with you. Another thing that helps is in the military, we wear our resumes on our chest, right? We wear the resume on our chest. So have something that made you stand out. Wear it as a little pin, a miniature pin on your collar. If you're a pilot, wear your pilot's pin. If you were a crew member, wear that. And that'll elicit questions from people who, again, yeah, eh,
Yeah, just like a little tie tack or a little thing that like when you're in a suit and you're in the civilian world or you're going to job interviews or a job fair or something like that, just have that little kind of thing. And that one little thing, like you said, will make you stand out. Yeah, I love that. That's a great tip.
yeah. I mean, you wear that when you're hopping out, when you get on the plane, it's going to be the pilot or the co-pilot will say hi to you. Definitely the flight attendant. But the number of times the pilot or the co-pilot are prior service and they'll say, "Hey, you were so and so." Yeah, you know what? They talk to the flight attendant. Next thing you know, you get upgraded from economy to business class.
There you go. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah, and those little things are really, really, really help, and it's just all about networking, right? It's all about building that network. So let's fast forward to the story here because you know 9/11 happens, you get hit with some more deployments, but you start buying real estate. So in your civilian job, because you are a reservist, you were doing financial services, right? Is that correct? In Miami at this point in the story?
Yes.
Okay. So you're in Miami, you're doing
I
some
was
financial
what's called
services
a fund
stuff.
wholesaler. Mhm.
Okay, okay. So you're doing some financial services, fund wholesaling stuff. Why real estate?
Again, I'm the son of immigrants, and I remember my dad would often look kind of the distance in Brooklyn, and he'd say to himself, if we only owned the building, if we only owned a couple of buildings. So that was something that just stuck in our mind. And I remember talking about this whole Miami Vice thing. We went on a spring break, my family, to Miami, and we went to South Beach. And at that time, South Beach was not what it is today. It was a rough place. It was rough. And with my godfather, and I thought my godfather was rich because he had a convertible Cadillac. And, I'd never been in one.
Mhm.
So, but we're driving by South Beach and the sun, it's beautiful, but it's still a rough place. I mean, if you saw that movie Scarface, that was a weekly occurrence, those shootouts on
Yikes.
South Beach. That wasn't a movie. That was a real life. That was a documentary. It wasn't a movie. And at every sign, every building, it said had a red thing. It said for sale by owner. And it was owned almost exclusively by an old Jewish guy from New York. He'd moved down from Brooklyn, and his kids went to Harvard. They didn't want to run in apartment buildings up north. And my godfather told my dad, he says, "Zambrano, you're good at saving money. Buy one of these buildings." And whatever my godfather said was a Cuban guy, he would do. So he jumps out of the car, goes, makes a handshake deal, buys a building. Long story short, he got talked out of the building, which is like a big mistake. Big mistake. Years later, after coming from the first Gulf War, because I'm a masochist, I go back to that building. I remember, and what we could have bought, the entire building was the cost of one apartment in that building.
Ooh. Oof.
And we're only talking maybe eight,
Yeah.
10 years. No, maybe not even 10 years, maybe 8. So what we could have bought again, the entire building was the cost of one apartment. So those things just stayed in my mind. They just stayed in my mind. You know that this thing could.
That kind of lost opportunity,
Mhm.
we call it opportunity cost because at any time you can have a certain amount of capital that you're looking to deploy, and then you gotta weigh the cost of opportunity. Hey, if I put this here, not only what am I gonna get out of this deal, but what other deals may I miss
Mhm,
out
mhm.
on? Or will I or may not miss out on, may I not be able to contribute because I put all my eggs in this basket? So that cost of opportunity, in this case, your godfather, saying, "Hey, I want to get into this deal," and whatever, and getting talked out of it. Maybe there was a separate opportunity cost. Maybe the deal wasn't right. Whatever the case may be. But fast forward 10 years, and you're seeing, oh wow, man, this real estate really
Mhm.
appreciated in a way that you didn't think possible. So did you end up start buying in Miami in South Florida, or did you pick
No,
another?
I bought here in South Florida. I bought locally. I mean, I'm in South Florida. It's people want to be here. So first property I bought was
Sure.
a triplex. It was a triplex, and that was like learning the hard way because I was self managing and this that. And, I mean, it was a learning experience to understatement. But the fact that I had this asset that could pay for itself, I remember it paid my FPNL bill, Florida Power and Light bill, and then it helped pay a SUV that I wanted, and it didn't come out of my pocket. I was like, "Holy smokes." So that was the first deal. Then I did some not so good deals, which is buying like a condos in Orlando. I was not happy about that. Uh, then one where I learned a lot, beat me up, but I learned a lot, and I was up to JV with the city of Fort Lauderdale, and they put money in too, uh, and they were like the 800-pound gorilla, but on my side. So I did that. Mhm.
Sure. So let's dig into some of these deals here because that's interesting. So
Mhm.
on the triplex on the first one, where in South Florida?
Hollywood, Florida.
Where are we talking here?
Yeah,
Okay, Hollywood, Florida. Yeah, so north of Miami, in
right.
between Miami and Fort Lauderdale area, that kind of MSA. So you're in Hollywood now. Is this a house hack where you're living in one of these units and you got the other two rented, or is it straight up investment property?
Would have known about house hacking and so forth. I would have done it the reverse. I would have bought that first, then I would have bought my house I lived in later on. So, note to
I
everyone,
understand.
buy
Right,
the
right.
triplex, fourplex first, then buy your quote unquote home, second or third.
hmm Yeah, yeah, 100%. You and house hack your way to equity in that property. Now, was your strategy, was it buy and hold? Was it, do you still have that asset, or was it kind of like a shorter term play where you forcing appreciation, forcing value? Like what was the game plan at the time, and what decisions would you make differently now, knowing what you know
The
now?
game plan was to get a game plan.
There you go. The game plan was to write the game
That
plan
was the
while
game
the
plan.
game was underway.
It was a buddy of
There you go.
mine from, let's just call it another government agency on one of the deployments, and we got along good with these guys. I mean, they would say, "You all know how to fight. That's not something we do." And it was true. And as a gift, he gave me a book on real estate. Okay. And I read this book, it's Steve Burgess or something like that. And that helped propel me to make that investment. So, but really I wanted was the cash flow. Asset that could pay for itself. And if it paid for itself, I was happy. Yeah.
Sure. Right. Yeah, and that's something, obviously that a lot of listeners in this podcast are all about. They're all about trying to find cash flow, and that's what I always tell people: try to be a cash flow investor first. And you got different levers you can pull depending on the asset that you're investing in, which we'll talk about now, Nelson. Obviously, going from a long term rental to a short term rental, or even a mid term rental or something like that. But implementing those different strategies to manipulate the cash flow
Hmm.
in
Hmm.
an asset, you can underwrite it certain ways. Obviously, you want to underwrite conservatively, but then you want to make sure that if you want to go and say, hey, you know what, I'm going to get this triplex and I'm going to turn two of these units into short-term rentals, great, and I'm going to live in the third. Like, there's so much creative thinking that goes into this, and I think a lot of times you don't know what you don't know, and that's okay. But as long as you keep that network strong, you'll figure it out along the way. But okay, so you started doing some deals, started getting some real estate under your belt. At what point did you kinda make the move and decide to get into the short-term rental game and head down to Puerto Rico and all this?
Before we do that, you mentioned something in this, again, military background. I know the Air Force, they probably have, I know the Marines, they're infantry heavy. Army, obviously, combat arms, combat air support. We have what's called a fallback position, right? Fall back, you can have a jump talk. And I use that in investing. So when we talk about underwriting conservatively, let's say short term rental, which is, you're getting the max, right? You're getting the max rental income. Excuse me. But then you should have like a fallback position. Your fallback position might be your midterm rental. This is the primary alternate. There's another position which you can go to third, and that in your underwriting might be your long-term rental. But you should always have like the first, the second, the third. Each is a fallback position where you can still cover the mortgage, cover the expenses. You might make less profit,
Mhm.
but you can still sleep at night. And so again, it's just using the military way of thinking. There's standards. So you can say, hey, my primary position is my short term rental. My fallback position is midterm rental. And then my, kind of not Maginot Line. We don't want to use that one. My final defensive
The
fire
next
line,
one,
right,
yeah, like the
is the long term rental, and just kind of
yeah. I can assure you from my Air Force background, I don't know any of that stuff, but I was deployed with the Army and the Marines, and they made me read the MDMP book and all of this stuff, and I was like, that's what I'm getting flashbacks of that and defining all of these different terms and all of this. But you're totally right. I mean, anecdotally, I literally had to go through this. I had to convert one of
yeah,
my short-term rentals to a midterm rental, and it was my quote unquote fallback position. My cash flow went down significantly, but I'm not stuck with the mortgage. So like it's okay. You gotta pivot.
yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, to the Navy, you're not Navy. It might be battle stations,
Right.
right? I mean, after battle stations in the Navy, you're swimming. So, so
Uh,
that's like your last position, okay? So you were asking me about on the short term rentals, right? How I made that transition?
just kind of progressing through your real estate story, you were buying in South Florida, you kind of made some mistakes and but like at what point did you decide to transition from the long-term rental buy and hold strategy to more of a short-term rental and hospitality based strategy?
Again, it goes back to networking the numbers. I have a very good friend of mine, and she's a property manager. She's now my asset manager. And we were talking, and she was telling me the numbers, and I just could not believe it. And she said, "Nelson, give me this property, and I'll like." I remember it was a one bedroom, and she says, "I can get." I think it was something like $4,000 out of that one bedroom, and I said, "There's no way you can. There is no way." So I said, "Sure,
Wow.
go for it." And 90 days later, she were like 3,700 dollars. I'm like 90 days, and then COVID came and it put an end to that. But
Mhm.
I had gotten up to speed, and then we kind of looked around, we transitioned to midterm rentals. So that was that big change. And I remember when she came to my house, she said, "Have you ever thought about doing this? Have you ever thought about it?" I said, "No, no, I haven't thought about doing any of that." And she was throwing numbers out. I'm like, "What are you high or something?"
That's that New York
Yeah.
kind. What are you, high? The hell's wrong with you?
And she said, "Give me 90 days." And I gave her 90 days, because I mean she has her credibility. And sure enough, we were able
Sure.
to hit that number. I mean, it was going on the progression. And then we switched, or rather I switched to midterm rentals. Yeah.
And is this at this point, are you in Puerto Rico or are you just doing this in
No, I
Florida?
was doing this in Florida and during COVID because you had COVID happen
Mhm.
and then you couldn't do anything. And I remember her and I, we would have these planning sessions, right? In the
Sure.
military, you have these huddles and planning. So she really liked that. And we would like strategize and what about this? And what about this? And what about this? And what about that? What about this? And then finally we said, well, who can still do this? And it was, what do you call it? Not emergency services, but the essential workers. I said, well, who are the essential workers?
Oh, yeah, essential
Nurses.
workers. So, like
Yeah.
nurses and
Yeah.
doctors and all kinds of
So
stuff.
then it was like,
Got
okay,
it.
that's who we got to rent to. Well, how do we find them? And then I was able to get a list of like 20 or 30 nurse organizations, and I pitched to them all. And I
Mhm,
did like my own little mini Airbnb on all of their pages and websites listing. And I said, hey, come to South Florida. I follow all the
mhm.
COVID rules. I follow all that. And I have to admit, I had my own self interest at heart, right? I said, if this really is the end of the world, I want to have the nurses and the medical people next to me. Yeah.
There you go. You can knock on the door and say like, "Hey, can you help me out
Yeah.
here? I know
Yeah.
you're
I
off
mean,
shift right now, but,
right.
keep them close."
So,
That's good strategy.
and that's how I made and then I interviewed the number four person at Furnish Finder on my podcast. And then I got her on and then talking
Yes.
about the network, her ex-husband was a Marine stationed at the embassy in Colombia. So, I'm like, you're part of the tribe. Come on over. So that's how I made the transition to the midterm rentals in the middle of COVID.
Yeah, man, that's yeah, and it's a genius transition on it just goes back to kind of that military background that we all share and having that idea to stay flexible and have multiple exit strategies, multiple fallback positions. And when something's not going right and life throws you a curveball, a massive curveball like COVID was, I mean, you could have done nothing and just been paying these mortgages, or you could have figured it out and you figured it out and then you just tailored some things, tailored your short-term rentals to the travel nurses and got a lot of those. I have to ask, are you still getting that same demand for travel nurses and that that subset, that demographic in South Florida now that COVID's kinda calmed down?
I it's a good question because I really backed away from that as soon as the short-term rental market opened back
Mhm.
up again. So I
Sure.
backed away from the travel nurses, and it's probably something that I should.
Just re-pivoted back to just,
Yeah,
like, regular short-term rentals because
right.
you can, and,
Mhm.
they make more money anyway. Okay, so you're in Florida. At what point then did you just decide to replicate this down in Puerto Rico, and why Puerto Rico?
That's going to be part of that I won't necessarily talk about some other time. But I was looking here at the souvenir shops through someone else that I
Mhm.
know. And the due diligence process of looking at the souvenir shops, it's very similar to the short-term rental because you're looking at the seasons of
You mean to
right.
purchase,
Well,
like, to purchase a souvenir shop?
right. Well, it was going to be almost like seller financing kind of opportunity. It
Mhm.
was gonna be like a seller financing
Sure,
where we would work the shops, maybe some kind of sweat equity, and then we would buy it, and the person would have an income stream for that, and then at some point down the road, we'd pay them off. And me, quite
sure.
frankly, I wanted their experience because they have a ton of experience. And guess what? They're also prior military too. So that really helped cinch the deal. Okay. That really helped it a lot. It was funny because he said something. He said, "What you've done in the military, I don't have to worry about you quitting." Yeah. I
That's
mean,
right.
and that gave him a lot of peace of mind. He says, "I don't have to
That's
worry
true.
about you being a quitter," you know? So, but as a due diligence process, I looked at the different tourist seasons in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico has more tourist seasons than most places. You got your summer, your winter, your fall, but most places that are warm have a very
Really?
low tourist season. Puerto Rico is unique. Puerto Rico's summer tourist season is still pretty strong. Why? Because, and many of us know, we all got a Puerto Rican friend in the military. And for a little bitty island, they put a lot of people into the armed forces. Well, a lot of people in the US, and they're very loyal to Puerto Rico. So they come back in the summertime with the kids because that's when it's available. Kids are out of school to visit the grandma, the grandfather, the
Mhm.
cousin, the uncle. Exactly.
Ah, the
And
family,
they
yes.
visit them, but they don't stay in the house with them. They stay at an Airbnb. They stay at a short-term rental.
Sure.
And they're buying up stuff at the souvenir shop that they want to take back to back to wherever they're California, New York, Chicago, the base. They want to take some food or
Mhm.
trinkets but that was a steady influx of people coming in. And I said, maybe we can do the stores and
Mhm.
buy more short-term rentals. And then as I kept on doing my due diligence, I found out is that Puerto Rico had been in a 20-year recession. Okay. Puerto Rico had been in a 20-year recession and it was starting to come out. It's still in it, by the way. But it's starting to come out. And then on top of that, when our great president Trump, no pro or against, he threw those towels. These people almost went apeshit here. But
Mhm.
but the positive thing about it
Yeah.
is that a lot of Americans found out that wow, I don't have to go to Mexico, the Dominican Republic. There's this island called Puerto Rico that it's like being in another country, but they take dollars. I have the safety of the U.S. I get to enjoy this
Mhm.
kind of tropical paradise, but it's still the U.S. I don't need a passport. At the end of the day, it is the U.S. So there was an influx of people. And then in Puerto Rico
Mhm.
has a bunch of incentives, which is amazing. They have the number one industry in Puerto Rico is not tourism, believe it or not. It is actually pharmaceuticals. Okay. So you've got Pfizer, you've got Amgen here. I mean, a ton
Oh,
of
interesting.
pharmaceuticals here, the big ones. And they get enormous tax credits. So that's part of weird. The second business that they have very big, believe it or not, is private equity because of the tax benefit, the tax advantages. Third is tech companies. A fair amount
Mhm.
of technology companies are here. And believe it or not, number four is tourism. You would have thought tourism was number one. So now that tourism is making this huge strides going forward, there's a lack of housing for tourism.
Sure.
So hotels, boutique hotels, and some short-term rental properties are getting tax credits, which normally would be, especially for the smaller investors, which we'd be that's out of our league. Those are only available for developers of 1,000, 2,000 unit apartment
Sure.
complexes. They're only available to Pfizer, but now they're available to smaller investors.
Okay. So taking advantage of the rules that are down there, I love the due diligence breakdown that you shared on, not just economically, but I think everything that you just discussed when people are looking at a market, whether it's Puerto Rico or whatever market you're looking at, you got to consider all of these factors. So it kind of peels it like a layer of the onion, like one layer peels away and you find out something new and you find out something new. And you started with the souvenir shops and you're like, hey, I'm going to do this. I got this good deal. And then you're like, hey, wait a minute, there's more to this. How about we do some short term rentals? And then maybe, oh, look at all these tax credits we can do. Maybe we can do some hotels and everything. So before we get into the bonus round, because I got to take you there soon, Nelson, what's your current laydown in Puerto Rico and what's the future hold for you there?
By lay down, I mean, what do we have? I just want to make sure.
Yeah, like you're that yeah, yeah. What do you have like the assets that you have? Are you looking to grow that? Are you looking to move it somewhere else? Or it seems like you're there to stay.
Yes, yes. So in a market like Puerto Rico, I mean, a lot of people, they're calling in, they call into brokers or agents, or they come visit. And so that's the first kind of filter, right? They'll always ask you, when are you going to be here? And my answer is, well, I'm already here. Oh, how long are you going to be here? And I tell them, I bought a house here. So right there, I'm always knocking out my competition and people are taking me more seriously. And then I tell them, well, my daughter goes to school here. And then I let them know I am part of the community. I am
Sure.
not some fly by night dude. So the good stuff needs to come this way. So that's the first thing is to build that team, right? You got to build a team, the lawyers, the bankers, everything that comes along with a team. Then right
Mhm.
now, the plan is to be buying property other people cannot close on, or it's difficult for them to do the value add. We take it over and then we do heavy
Sure.
value adds. For example, we're closing on a place. It's going to be a 3 bedroom, 2 bath home, and we're going to make it into a 9 bedroom boutique hotel. So we're going to go up a level. We're going to put floors on it. And
Wow. Interesting.
so with that, so our valuation will almost triple, close to 2.5 times. We'll do that in a year's time. And is that pie in the sky? No, because it is part of cycle, as part of the team. I actually took our plan with our numbers. I took it to the bank. The bank said, check, are my numbers realistic? And they said, your numbers are realistic. And this is what we would, if you wanted to sell it or loan against it, and it was almost triple our numbers. So,
Wow. So you got kind of like a pre-appraisal before that you can go and use to get some construction loans and all of that financing lined up,
mhm.
right?
Right, and in
That's
that
great.
one, where it's gonna be all seller financing, 100% seller financing, we're gonna do that. This
Perfect.
goes back into training, right? The military has gotta be training, training, training. So, the seller financing, raise some capital from investors. Some will be foreign investors because I go overseas, raise capital over there, and some will be US investors. And then on top of that, we'll be able to throw in the tax credits. Now, how do those tax credits work? It's we can sell these. We can sell them to Amgen or Pfizer at 90 cents on the dollar.
Mhm.
Okay. So then that adds on top to our return as well. So the plan is to
Interesting.
continue
No,
buying
that's really interesting.
properties and do that here.
Yeah,
Uh,
and leveraging these transferable tax credits and adding to the bottom line. It's really cool. All right, man. Well, God, you shared a lot of information. I got to take you to the bonus round. It's the same four questions that we ask each and every guest. I am running short on time, so I'm going to fly through these. Are you
Okay.
ready? All right. Question number one: what book or software has really helped you crush it lately?
I'm not much of a software guy, so just learning Excel for me is a big thing. And but book,
There you go.
but there is one book, and it's a lot of us. I really like this book. It's called In Hostile Territory. In Hostile Territory, kind of
Oh,
difficult to
okay,
find,
interesting.
but basically, it's a book about written by a guy from the Mossad, Israeli Mossad, and it's really
Sure.
3 stories in one. One, it's about the actual missions that he went on. Two, each has a biblical story attached to it, right? As to how they had to apply
Oh,
something from the
interesting.
Old Testament. But then he takes the mission aspect and the biblical story aspect, and he gives the business application. So it's almost like 3 books in
Yeah.
one.
Oh,
And
that's really cool.
the business
Yeah, it's really cool.
application is so if he talks about focus, he talks about how you should network and be part of a group at all costs, no matter what. And so I like the fact that he
Uh,
can take an Old Testament story, how they applied it to training, the mission, and then the business application.
Perfect. Yeah, no, that's awesome. So we'll have that linked in our show notes, guys. You can go and try to get your hands on this book. Question number two for you: who's your biggest hero and why?
My biggest hero or heroes, one of which would be my dad. I mean, he didn't get to he accomplished a lot, taking into account where he came from. He wanted to do more. I think through my brother and I, he gets to kind of live some of that out. But he was the one who made the switch from going from this little bitty fishing village where he came from in South America and Colombia to saying, I'm going to live in the US and I want my kids to grow up and have the opportunities of the US. So and by the way,
Yeah.
my dad, his probably one big regret is that he never got to join the US military. He
Oh,
he always
interesting.
wanted to.
But I bet he was super
Yeah,
proud of you.
yeah, he is.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's incredible. Question number 3 for you. What do you like to do for fun, Nelson?
That's a good question right now because I haven't had much time to fun. What I enjoy doing, I enjoy working out, of heavy outdoor activities. I like to shoot. I shoot competitively. Pistol rifle. I
Mhm.
enjoy that. That's a pretty good fun thing.
That's awesome. Final question for you. 3 nuggets of wisdom that you could share with someone, whether they're transitioning out of the military into the real estate field, or they're looking for a new market, or they're looking for a new opportunity, looking to pivot to one of those fallback positions. What's some just general 3 nuggets that you can share with the community?
The first one is if a person's not actually retiring, they should, if they're going to get out, I tell them always stay in the reserves. Stay in the reserves. Why? Because you get to that reserve unit, you're going to have 30, 40 people that automatically look, have a degree of respect. Okay. So you're going to
Mhm.
have 30, 40 people that you're going to get to know them better. They've probably accomplished some things in their civilian lives. If you play your cards right, it would be easier for them to recommend you to an employer. And I can't emphasize that enough. One of my soldiers, just to go on with that, he was like, "Hey, sir, I heard you invest in real estate. Sure. And you got to meet my dad." Okay. Who's your dad? Well, his dad is, not was, one of the largest hotel owners in New York.
You
Yeah,
gotta meet my
yeah, you
dad.
gotta meet my dad.
Yeah,
You gotta
I
meet my
like
dad.
that.
I'm like, "Okay." So, again, that would have never happened unless I had stayed in the reserves. And
Sure.
it's not just, don't let little bullshit stop you from big stuff. "Oh, this guy, he's a pain in the
Sure.
ass," and
Sure.
don't let that stop you from, achieving massive things. So that would be one
Mhm.
on the transitioning side. And, think big. Really think big. You could be E4, E5, doesn't
Mm.
matter. Think big. You could be talking to a 1 star,
Yeah.
2 star, 3 star. There's something that that will take a huge headache off that 1, 2, 3, 4 stars headache. Quick story. In my unit, yet some haters. "I can't believe some of you guys make more money than the commanding general." Well, first of all, on the weekends, you're watching football. We're
Mhm.
doing deals. So it got to the
Yeah.
point where it got to the commanding general. I mean, it got to that ugly point, that point. And I remember he leaned over to him. I'm not going to mention his name, but he leans over to me, goes, "Nelson." I said, "Yes, General." Because, I was kind of like the leader of the group of investors. And he said, "How do you keep your occupancy up? I got vacancy. This shit's driving me crazy." And I'm thinking, I didn't
Yeah,
think a general had
exactly.
these problems, but he did. And then he called in the
Yeah.
staff and he says, "I just want you to know I'm on the side of the soldiers." And it was a joint unit. So there was Navy and Air Force and Marines in there. So,
Yeah.
my little group, and some were E5s in there, they were the solution, to this 1 star who became a 2 star of his vacancy. You know. So this think
Mhm.
big.
There you go. Oh, man. Yeah. No, I love these tips that you're sharing, and we gotta we're running, unfortunately, out of time. Nelson, for folks who wanna get in touch with you and they wanna learn more about what you're doing in Puerto Rico, they wanna learn more about your story, how can they best do that?
Yeah, a couple of different ways. Obviously, through our the Facebook page, you can send me a private message
Sure.
there. Nelson Zambrano. My email address, I'll give you two. Nelson at normandygroup.us. And that's, I spell Normandy, N as in November, O as in Oscar, R as in Romeo, Mike, Alpha, November, Delta, Yankee Group,
Mhm.
GROUP, US, excuse me, Nelson at normandygroup.us, and NJZ multifamily at gmail.com. Always reference ADPI or the podcast, and happy to help you guys out. Also,
Love that.
I'm starting an ADPI meetup group here in Puerto Rico as well.
Oh, in Puerto
Yeah.
Rico?
Yeah, yeah.
Hell yeah.
Mhm.
Awesome, awesome. Yeah, so and that's gonna be really powerful, guys. I don't know if you know this, but we have I think it's like over 65 worldwide meetup groups or something that meet on a monthly basis. Just they're popping up everywhere. It's just really, really cool. Nelson, this has been absolutely incredible to hear your story, and I hope it's inspired a lot of listeners. And I really appreciate having you on the show, man. We're gonna have it again when I go down to Puerto Rico and we hang out and do some of these
Come on
deals.
down. I want to deal with people like us.
Yeah, let's do it. All
Thank
right,
you.
man. Thanks.
All right.
Thanks a lot.